You have spent years trying to find yourself. Reading, journaling, searching. And Carl Jung would tell you, there was never a yourself hidden somewhere waiting to be found. That idea is comforting, and it is wrong. Self-discovery, the way most people use the word, is a trap disguised as growth. It tells you that somewhere underneath the noise, there is a finished, authentic you, pure, complete, just covered in dust. Find it, wipe it off, done. Jung spent his entire career studying the psyche, and he never described anything like that. What he described instead was harder, slower, and far more real. He called it individuation, not discovery, construction, not uncovering a self that already exists, integrating one that does not exist yet, not as a finished whole. If you are still operating on the find yourself model, you are going to spend your whole life waiting for a moment that will never come. Because there is nothing to find. There is only work to do. Stay with this. By the end, you will understand why the people who actually do this work often end up alone, and why that loneliness is not a failure. Here is the promise Jung's framework makes, and it is not comfortable. You do not get to discover a pre-made identity. You get to build one piece by piece out of material you would rather not look at. The popular version of self-discovery assumes the self is singular, good, and already there. Jung's psychology assumes the opposite. It assumes the psyche is divided. Part of it lives in the light, the part you show people. Jung called this the persona, the mask built for social life. Part of it lives in the dark, the part you deny, reject, or never developed. Jung called this the shadow. And somewhere underneath both, coordinating the whole system without your permission, is what Jung called the self. Not your ego, not your personality, but the deeper organizing center of the entire psyche, conscious and unconscious combined. Individuation is the lifelong process of bringing the ego into a working relationship with the self. It means meeting the shadow instead of denying it. It means taking off the persona long enough to see what is underneath it. It is not a weekend retreat. It is not a 5-step plan. It is the central task of a human life, and Jung believed most people never seriously begin it. He also drew from decades of clinical observation across what he called the collective unconscious, a layer of the psyche shared across humanity, expressed through recurring patterns he called archetypes. The persona, the shadow, the self, these are not personality quirks unique to you. They are archetypal structures every human psyche organizes itself around, in different costumes, in every culture, in every era. This is why the find yourself narrative is so seductive and so wrong at the same time. It correctly senses that something deep and structural is at stake. It incorrectly assumes that structure is a static object waiting to be located, instead of a dynamic process that has to be lived, deliberately, one confrontation at a time. Let's start with the first distinction almost nobody makes. Intelligence and consciousness are not the same thing. You can be brilliant, educated, articulate, and still be almost completely unconscious of your own psyche. Intelligence is a tool. It solves problems, analyzes data, wins arguments. Consciousness, in Jung's sense, is something else entirely. It is the capacity to see your own patterns, your own defenses, your own shadow, instead of just using your intelligence to justify them. Think about the smartest person you know. Now ask yourself, do they actually understand why they react the way they do under stress? Do they know what they are avoiding? Do they know which parts of themselves they refuse to look at? Or do they simply use their intelligence to build better excuses? This is the trap. A sharp mind can rationalize almost anything. It can turn avoidance into boundaries. It can turn fear into logic. It can turn denial into an argument nobody can beat, because the person making it is genuinely brilliant. Jung saw this constantly in his clinical work. Educated, successful people who could analyze the entire world except themselves. Consciousness does not care how many books you have read. It only asks one question: are you willing to turn the analysis inward? Jung himself broke away from Freud in 1913 partly over this exact issue. Freud had built a system focused heavily on the unconscious as a storehouse of repressed drives to be interpreted by an expert. Jung wanted something else. He wanted a psychology where the individual became conscious enough to interpret their own psyche, not remain dependent on an outside authority forever. That is what consciousness actually looks like in practice. Not more information. More ownership of the information you already have. You already know somewhere which parts of your life run on autopilot. You already know which reactions are old, inherited, automatic. Reactions that belong to a version of you built years ago, still running the show without your permission. Intelligence can describe those reactions in elegant language. Consciousness is what happens when you stop describing them and start owning them. Because the moment you do, something uncomfortable happens. You start noticing the gap between who you perform and who you actually are. And that gap is where the real work of individuation begins. Before we go further, I want you to sit with something. If what you just heard landed somewhere real, that is not an accident. That is the beginning of consciousness doing its job. Most people scroll past this kind of content and forget it in 10 minutes. If you are still here, some part of you already knows the comfortable story about finding yourself was never enough. That is worth marking. Subscribe if this is the kind of thinking you want more of, because we are only at the surface. The next part explains why almost everyone chooses comfort over consciousness, and why that choice is not really theirs. There is a reason most people never start this process, and it is not laziness. It is something Jung wrote about directly, especially later in his life, when he watched the 20th century descend into mass ideology and mass violence. In his book, The Undiscovered Self, Jung argued that modern people were increasingly dissolving into what he called the mass, a psychological state where the individual stops thinking as an individual and starts thinking as a statistic, a member, a unit of the group. He was not talking about crowds in the street. He was talking about a psychological posture, the tendency to let the group think for you, feel for you, decide for you. Jung's concern was that when enough individuals stop doing their own inner work, they become easier to move, easier to direct, easier to convince, because a person who has not examined their own shadow will always find it easier to project that shadow onto an enemy the group has already chosen for them. Mass mentality feels safe because it removes a terrifying responsibility, the responsibility of being singular, of thinking your own thought even when it disagrees with everyone around you. Comfort, in this sense, is not really about pleasure. It is about dilution. If your beliefs are the group's beliefs, you are never fully exposed. If you are wrong, everyone is wrong with you. But individuation asks something the group cannot give you. It asks you to separate your own psychic material from the collective noise, and to take responsibility for what you find. Jung was writing in the shadow of 2 world wars and the rise of totalitarian movements when he made this argument, and he was blunt about the stakes. A population made up of psychologically unconscious individuals is not just personally stunted, it is politically dangerous, because it can be moved as a single organism by anyone who understands how to speak to the mass instead of the person. He did not believe institutions alone could prevent this. He believed only individuals who had done their own inner work, who knew their own shadow, who could tell the difference between their own conviction and the group's, could resist being absorbed into a mass movement without noticing. That separation is uncomfortable. It should be. Because the moment you stop borrowing your identity from the crowd, you are alone with your own conclusions, and some of those conclusions are going to be inconvenient. Think about the last time you disagreed, silently, with something everyone around you accepted without question. Did you say it out loud? Or did you fold it back into the group opinion just to avoid the friction of standing apart? Most people fold. Every time. And every time they fold, the muscle required for individuation gets a little weaker, and the muscle required for conformity gets a little stronger. Jung did not see this as a moral failing. He saw it as the default setting of an unexamined psyche, the path of least resistance for a mind that has never practiced standing alone. This is where most people stop. Not because they lack intelligence. Because the next step requires something intelligence cannot supply. Courage in front of an uncomfortable truth. And that brings us to the mechanism underneath all of this, the psychological fear of truth itself. Here is something almost no one says out loud. The mind does not primarily fear pain. It fears the collapse of the identity built around avoiding that pain. When a truth threatens who you believe yourself to be, the psyche does not calmly evaluate the evidence. It defends. Jung described the ego as fundamentally conservative. It protects the existing structure of the personality, even when that structure is outdated, even when it is quietly destroying you. This is why people can be shown clearly in their own behavior that a belief is false or a relationship is harmful, and still refuse to see it. It is not stupidity. It is self-preservation of an identity that would not survive the truth intact. Think about a belief you have held for years. Now imagine someone proved it wrong in front of you, with evidence you could not dispute. Notice what happens in your body before your mind even finishes processing the argument. Tension. Defensive. The the urge to change the subject. That reaction is not about the argument. It is about the threat to the self-image that argument represents. Jung's entire clinical method was built around this resistance. He knew that showing a patient their own unconscious material rarely worked through logic alone, because the ego experiences unconscious truth as a kind of psychological death, the death of the old, familiar version of the self. This is why confrontation with the shadow so often produces dreams, physical symptoms, or sudden emotional outbursts before it produces any clear intellectual insight. The psyche resists on every level, not just the rational one. Jung took this seriously enough to spend years recording and analyzing his own dreams and unconscious material, in what later became known as his confrontation with the unconscious, the same process applied to himself that he would later ask his patients to undergo. This is why individuation is often described in Jungian language as a kind of symbolic dying and being reborn. The old persona has to loosen its grip before anything new can integrate. Most people will choose the comfortable lie 1,000 times before they choose the uncomfortable truth once. Not because they are weak, because the truth asks them to let a version of themselves die, and nothing in the nervous system wants to volunteer for that. Consider a marriage that quietly stopped working years ago. Both people can feel it. Neither says it. What? Because saying it out loud would collapse an identity, faithful partner, stable family, person who does not give up, built over decades. It is easier to defend the structure than to grieve it. This is not unique to relationships. It happens with careers people privately hate, beliefs people privately doubt, friendships that privately drained them years ago. The truth was available the entire time. What was missing was not information. It was the willingness to let an old identity die so a truer one could take its place. The people who do it anyway are not smarter. They are simply willing to tolerate that death long enough for something else to take its place. That willingness has a name in Jung's system, and it explains one of the strangest and most predictable social patterns you have probably already noticed. Have you ever noticed that the person who starts thinking differently starts getting attacked? Not for anything they did. For simply refusing to think the way everyone else does. Jung had a precise explanation for this, and it is called shadow projection. The shadow, remember, is everything about ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. Our own weakness, our own doubt, our own hidden desires, our own unexamined contradictions. Because the shadow is unbearable to face directly, the psyche does something clever. It finds it outside instead. It locates a person who seems to embody the rejected quality, and it reacts to that person with an intensity that has almost nothing to do with them. This is why the group so often turns on the individual who dares to think independently. That person becomes a screen. Onto that screen, everyone else projects the parts of themselves they have never confronted. Their own doubt about the shared belief, their own suppressed desire to break away, their own fear that they made the wrong choice by staying comfortable. It is far easier to attack the person who left the group than to ask why leaving felt necessary to them in the first place. Jung noticed this pattern everywhere, in families and institutions and entire societies. The one who becomes conscious first is rarely thanked for it. Often they are punished for it. Think of the sibling in a family who finally names the dysfunction everyone silently agreed never to mention. Suddenly that sibling is too sensitive, too negative, causing problems. Nothing about the family changed except one person's willingness to see it clearly. And the reaction was not gratitude. It was resistance. This is not because they did something wrong. It is because their consciousness exposes, by contrast, everyone else's unconsciousness. And nobody enjoys standing next to a mirror they did not ask for. If this has happened to you, if becoming more aware cost you approval, comfort, or relationships, understand what actually happened. You did not become the problem. You became the screen. And once you understand that mechanism, you stop taking the reaction personally because you can finally see what it actually is. Not information about you, but information about the person doing the projecting. Which brings us to the part of this process almost nobody warns you about. Individuation is lonely. Jung knew this, and he did not pretend otherwise. As you separate from the collective mindset, as you stop performing the persona everyone expects and start integrating the shadow you used to deny, you naturally drift out of alignment with people who are still fully identified with the group. Jung used a term borrowed from anthropology to describe this early, undifferentiated state: participation mystique, a psychological condition in which a person's identity is fused with the group, with almost no boundary between I and we. Individuation is, quite literally, the process of dissolving that fusion. And when the fusion dissolves, so does some of the automatic closeness it provided. This is not punishment. It is the natural cost of no longer needing the group's approval to know who you are. In 2 essays on analytical psychology, Jung described individuation as a process that inevitably differentiates a person from the collective psyche, not out of rebellion, but simply because becoming conscious of your own unique psychological makeup means you can no longer fully merge back into an undifferentiated we. That differentiation is not optional if the process is real. A little distance from the group is not a side effect of individuation. It is part of the definition. People who were comfortable with the old version of you may not know what to do with the new one. Conversations that used to feel easy may start to feel hollow, because you are no longer willing to perform agreement you do not feel. This is where many people panic and try to rejoin the mass mindset just to relieve the loneliness. Jung called any regression away from a hard-won consciousness back into an earlier, undifferentiated state a kind of psychological retreat, and it never actually resolves the discomfort. It only postpones it. The loneliness of individuation is not evidence that you are doing something wrong. It is evidence that you have stopped outsourcing your identity to people who never had the authority to define it in the first place. And here is the part that changes everything about how you experience other people once you have done this work. The moment you stop needing the group's approval to feel stable, you become extremely difficult to manipulate. Manipulation at its core depends on leverage. And leverage depends on unmet psychological need. If you desperately need to belong, someone can threaten exclusion to control you. If you desperately need to be seen as good, someone can weaponize guilt to control you. If you have never confronted your own shadow, someone can trigger it without you even realizing you are being triggered. Every manipulation tactic requires an unconscious lever to pull. This is also why mass movements, cults, and rigid ideologies recruit so effectively from people who have never done any shadow work. An unexamined psyche is not just vulnerable to manipulation by individuals. It is vulnerable to manipulation at scale, by whoever offers the clearest identity, the simplest enemy, the most comforting sense of belonging. Jung's concern in The Undiscovered Self was precisely this, that mass movements do not need to convince you of anything complicated. They only need to locate the unmet psychological need you have never faced and offer to fill it. Individuation removes the levers one at a time. When you have already faced the parts of yourself others try to use against you, their attempts land on nothing. There is no hidden shame to expose because you already looked at it yourself. When you no longer need external validation to know your own worth, threats to withdraw that validation stop working. This is why people who have done real inner work often seem strangely unbothered by criticism, manipulation, and social pressure that would destabilize almost anyone else. It is not that they do not feel it. It is that the old psychological entry points, the untouched shadow, the fragile persona, the desperate need to belong, have already been closed deliberately one at a time. There is a difference between someone who is calm because they have not looked at themselves, and someone who is calm because they have. The first calm is fragile. It shatters the moment the right pressure is applied because it was never tested. The second calm has already survived the pressure, internally, alone, long before anyone else applied it from the outside. That second kind of calm is what individuation actually produces. Not the absence of vulnerability. The exhaustion of every lever an outside force could have used against it. Think about the last person who tried to guilt you, shame you, or exclude you into compliance. If it worked because some part of you still needed what they were threatening to take away: approval, belonging, the comfort of being seen as good. If it did not work, it is because you had already faced that need directly, and it no longer had the same grip on you. Manipulation cannot create a lever that consciousness has already dismantled. The price of that freedom was the loneliness we just talked about. But the return on that price is a kind of psychological sovereignty that cannot be taken from you, because it was never given to you by anyone else in the first place. Now here is the most dangerous part of this entire process, and Jung was explicit about it. Individuation is not a license for arrogance. This is where a lot of people get it wrong, and it destroys the very growth they worked so hard to build. It is tempting once you can see the mass mindset clearly, once you understand your own shadow, once you feel the distance from people still asleep to their own patterns, to feel superior. Jung warned against exactly this. He explicitly distinguished individuation from mere individualism, a self-centered withdrawal that prizes uniqueness for its own sake, dismisses the collective entirely, and quietly inflates the ego instead of integrating the self. That inflation is a trap disguised as growth, almost identical in shape to the very unconsciousness you were trying to escape. Jung had a word for a psychic state flipping into its own opposite without warning, in antiodromia. A person who works hard to escape blind conformity can, without noticing, become blindly convinced of their own superiority, a different mask worn with just as little awareness as the first one. In his later work, Ion, Jung described this kind of unconscious ego inflation as one of the most common ways the individuation process derails, not through failure, but through a kind of premature victory lap. If seeing the pattern in others turns into contempt for others, you have not individuated. You have simply swapped one unconscious identity, the mass identity, for another one, the identity of the one who sees clearly, which can become just as rigid, just as defended, just as blind to its own shadow. True consciousness does not look down on the people still sleepwalking through their persona and their projections. It remembers honestly that it was there too. That it still returns there sometimes, under stress, under fear, under old wounds reactivated. Jung's shadow work never ends. There is no permanent, finished, superior version of a person who has arrived. Even Jung himself, late in life, described individuation as an approximation of wholeness, never a final destination. Something you move toward asymptotically, not something you reach and then rest in. If a teacher, an influencer, or a version of yourself ever claims to have finished the work, that claim is itself a red flag. It usually signals inflation, not integration. The goal is not distance from other people. It is depth within yourself, held with enough humility to know the work is never complete. Picture two people who both left the same limiting belief system behind. One spends years quietly mocking everyone who has not woken up yet, collecting a private sense of superiority instead of doing further work. The other keeps turning the same honest attention inward, still finding new shadow material, still surprised by their own blind spots, still capable of listening to someone who disagrees with them. Only one of those two people is actually individuating. The other one simply built a new persona out of their own insight and stopped there. Lucidity without arrogance looks like this: seeing clearly and staying kind anyway. Understanding manipulation and refusing to become a manipulator yourself. Standing apart from the mass mindset, without needing to declare yourself better than the mass. That balance is the actual difficult finish line. Not comfort, not superiority, not certainty. Just an honest, ongoing relationship with your own psyche. So here is where this leaves you. There was never a finished self hiding underneath your life, waiting to be discovered. There is only the persona you built to survive socially, the shadow you built to avoid facing yourself, and the self quietly waiting for you to do the work of bringing all of it together. You do not find that. You build it, deliberately, slowly, often alone. The choice in front of you is binary, and Jung would not soften it for you. Stay comfortable inside the mass mindset, protected, agreeable, and unconscious, or begin the harder, lonelier, truer process of becoming who you actually are, one uncomfortable truth at a time. Nobody else can make that choice for you. And nobody else is coming to hand you a finished identity. Somewhere, right now, there is a version of you still performing the persona instead of questioning it, still borrowing beliefs instead of examining them, still choosing the comfortable lie over the inconvenient truth. That version of you is not wrong. It is simply unfinished. Jung did not offer a shortcut past that unfinished state, and neither will this video. What he offered was a direction, inward, toward the shadow, toward integration, toward the self, instead of outward, toward the approval of a crowd that was never going to hand you an identity in the first place. The work was always yours. Start it today and share with someone who needs to hear this exact message right now. Because the version of you still waiting to be discovered does not exist. The only version of you worth having is the one you are willing to build.